Out, give you a small sketch. There is a fear that is unrecognized by man. Of course, it is recognized on another level by life, or I could not enunciate it, much less pronounce it. It is a fear that at first, through words, would sound as though it is absolute insanity, but here we are again. It is a fear of actually existing in a biotic, functioning universe. And on the surface, it would literally, by all sense of reason, appear to be, or would have to be, exactly the opposite. If this is a functional, growing, healthy, progressing universe, and you are inescapably a part of it, forgetting for the time being about death and what may or may not be known about death, but to know that you are a part of that on the surface would apparently offer some kind of relief if it were the truth, and someone could come forth and say, listen, and they spoke with the authority of the truth, or in some way attempted to give examples and to make people get a glimpse of it. And yet it's not true that there is absolutely a fear that humanity has yet to recognize, and the fear is that nothing is broken, that things are quite healthy, and that this is a functional universe and biotic from beginning to end. It's a fear. And I'm not going much further, but since there is no rational proof of this, try this as my parting shot for paragraph 1. That this fear ages in the horizontal sense, in the same sense that human life ages on this horizontal plane. And as this fear ages and the person ages, you become more aligned with what we have been calling de-influences. And then it produces what I will fleetingly describe to you as being the mechanical ability to escape the fear of discovering that all is growth. Did that get too convoluted? In the ordinary sense, to see someone, since none of you, I assume, would consider yourself old as yet. As a matter of fact, none of you are irreversibly old as of yet. But with the ordinary, to get old, set in your ways, to become opinionated, cubed, to become almost a satire in your reactionary opinions, beliefs, and behavior, especially speech and apparent feelings, to become almost a satire of what you were even at the age of 25, this kind of archetypical old person that absolutely, as far as you can tell, believes that the whole world is going to hell and will discuss it as long as you care to, and anything you bring up, they can use that very thing as an example, that there is a prime area that you just mentioned, but you don't see that things are falling apart there. No matter what you mention, from politics to economics to religion to clothing. And you could start apparently trying to show them, well, here is an area where something good must be taking place. And on the contrary, they see it. They're wired up now to see it. They are working for good old D, no longer part-time. It's now full-time. And they see it all as falling apart. But there is a kind of mechanical freedom now from that initial fear. It's yours. 2, another short one. I'll mention something else about that most obscure of subjects, love. Since I finally brought it back into our public arena of speech, I have been inundated with notes, observations, and further questions. And many of you got a glimpse, many of you got a whiff of something through the task. But to go along with the perhaps confounding paragraph 1, how about this? There's one way to approach, quote, love would be by, quote, hating your own voices, including those that speak of love. Now, having said that, of course, even though I put hating in quotation marks, you know that's not true, because there's nothing to hate. It is a dismissal, but I used it for the good old shock effect. But if you understood what I meant, it is true that the way to approach love, one way, insofar as we can talk about there being overt things that one might do, would be for you to learn to hate every mechanical voice in you, to hate all the noise, including that which will speak of love, because it does not qualify as being something that is an unconditional encouragement of growth, as all of you should know by now. That yes, I love the person I'm with, and I've encouraged her or him, going back to school. But if you're ordinary, how long does that last? 2 or 3 times the person's late, and you realize, well, now they're hanging out with guys 10 years my junior. What the hell you need a master's degree for? Get on back home, drop out of school. Or encourage your girlfriend, if you always wanted to sing, why don't you go out and try to get a job singing? Or why don't you go hang around musicians? And 2 or 3 weeks later, you're biting your tongue, suddenly remembering all the stories I've heard about musicians. I'm taking obvious shots. But any mechanical noise going inside of anyone, no matter their religion, no matter their cultural background, the voice should be hated. It should be dismissed. If it had anything worthwhile to tell you, then you would not be sitting around listening to me talk about love. You would not be asking yourself, what is love? Because you've had voices talking to you as long as you've been alive. If they had anything to say, then someone wasn't listening. But if you were one of those someones, you do belong to probably one of the largest clubs on this planet. Now into full moon depth. We shouldn't laugh at the full moon because we all got here without being run over by other drivers. Of course, just barely. I want to try and direct you for a very specific reason, since we're coming up closer and closer and there'll be no turning back to doing something publicly in a way that I think all of you are going to find astounding, because I certainly assume, trust, look forward to as astounding me also. But specifically having to do with a kind of biochemical reality to religion and to growth. Can all of you now get a glimpse of the fact that taking any religion and then taking all religions as being a living entity within the body of life, that the core purpose of all religion in its initial stages, no matter whether they were praying to tree gods, no matter whether they were apparently confronted with prophets who were getting revelations directly from the gods, in its initial stages, all religion was serving the purpose to encourage man's growth. No matter how it seemed, no matter whether the people involved, whether the little community or the culture were still primarily miners and assembly line workers, that is, less sophisticated civilized people, or whether it was further up the evolutionary scheme of the nervous system. No matter what seemed to be the guise of the religion, no matter what seemed to be its teachings, initially it was doing one thing, and that was to encourage man's growth. And you can also see it in a way that, compared to verbally the other two forces I have put ephemeral names on, then all religion in its conception from the beginning, whether it lasted out X years or X squared years. Compared to the other forces, it was creative. It was not destructive. And if you begin to have some real understanding of what overall growth would be, of course, it has to be creative. Now work on this. You have got to be pleased to grow. There is no way out of it. And yet again, you're confronted. You've never had any cause to attempt to analyze it in some way along these lines. But you are confronted with what appears to be religion, what appears to be all forms of mystical activity or spiritual activity, is in direct contradiction to that. True religion, whatever it is I mean by that, didn't mean to leave you hanging. I'm talking about the initial stages when it is creative, when it is still serving the core purpose of encouraging directly, unconditional, it is encouraging the growth of man. Then by that description, when I speak of true religion, remember that description, then true religion is a biochemical permutation if you take any religion, if we consider Judaism as a religion, Islam a religion, then being a Muslim, being a Jew in the Christian sense, in the religious sense, being a Christian is a biotic alteration, and there is no way out of it. That is the beginning and the end of it. It has always been reported as, it has always been life's current information to men that what was going on was of some kind of invisible, i.e. spiritual, metaphysical, beyond the normal realm of ordinary biological existence. And yet the very act, the very thing that many of you have had voices, and it's true all over the world, that religion is some kind of hoax. To go to a service of some kind and to see people get up and engage in the Catholic rituals, or to go to a good Southern Baptist tent revival and see people dance and sing and say that the gods are speaking to them, or to say that they've undergone some kind of conversion. That is not some kind of insanity. It is not the people's imagination. It is not because from any voice you have from its viewpoint that the people are less civilized, less sophisticated. It's none of that. So when someone apparently has become, fill in the blank, of any religion, there has been a biochemical permutation vis-a-vis what they were before this. But for it to produce anything that resemble real change, that is growth, then the people involved must be pleased. What would appear to be the prophets, or the founders of religion, whoever you would care to conjure up, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, were like a radical employee of the research and development wing of life at that time. And they underwent this biochemical alteration. And they understood its benefit to life. They then turn around and they encourage others to pursue this. Then what you have, and the people who have gone through this, not limited, of course, to the people I mentioned, but using them as an example, they then turn it into, for reasons of having it being able to be spread to a wider area, because not that many people on this planet at any time, I've said this in other ways, but there are not that many people who can undergo, to a degree that I understand, that kind of biochemical, literal alteration of what they are. And so then it comes out as being laws of that religion, or tenets of that religion. And all it is the beginning and end of it. The laws come out describing the behavior that a person who had undergone that biochemical permutation would display. And so then, those that find themselves wired up to be, to some degree, attracted to life's creative growth, without any particular understanding, without a great deal of personal involvement, without that certain hunger, they find themselves attracted to whatever religion, whatever its basic laws are, or teachings. They find themselves agreeable to the prohibitions. But to take some of the obvious examples that are true in almost all religions, thou shalt not drink alcohol. After a certain point of this biochemical alteration, a Moses, a Jesus, somebody you never heard of, they simply see quite clearly that if a person continued to put alcohol in the body, you'd be like trying to bail out a boat that you were shooting holes in. That if indeed you find something that I have said, something that you get from this, to be intriguing, that this kind of biochemical alteration is not possible if you've got alcohol flowing through your bloodstream all the time. Therefore, the gods told me, don't drink. Leave that to those who are not on the pathway. Leave that to those who are not committed to our religion. And it strikes millions of people that, yes, that's true. Forget how they might try to apologize it, how they might try to explain it away. If someone asks them, well, did you join that religion that told you you had to quit drinking? Yes, I did. Well, I've always enjoyed a good drink. I don't understand that. Then they and you, anybody, can say, well, listen, you get drunk, you're inclined to want to break some of the other laws of the religion. You're inclined to do things that you would not do sober. Your behavior gets out of control. It's surely offensive. If the gods created us to look down and there you are with your head over the toilet, throwing up, stumbling about, incoherent, it just seems right. But I'm saying you forget all of that. After a certain point, that kind of biochemical alteration, in a sense, just makes it impossible to drink. Or the person understands that you cannot do this. It's just, you just can't do it with alcohol in the system constantly. Any so-called religious law that you could find on this planet, if you can get a glimpse of this, you would, or I could point out to you, but you would need to see it, that there is a biochemical reality behind it. Adultery. And I could, from a numerous number of yellow and even apparently blue level positions, point out, well, that is ridiculous. You know, sex is one thing, and the idea of, let us say, that some sociologists or some religious people, if they were of a certain psychological bent, they could say, well, freedom of sex would tear apart the family. It would just shred up the fabric of our society, any good society, and they can give a rational argument for it. But then there are other people, especially down in the mines, a lot of them down in advertising, who will say, look, I understand all that's true, but you know, what's a casual fuck if the other person doesn't know about it? It would seem to be some kind of argument over the positions, the relative positions of morality. And yet morality is biochemical. My inclination was to leave this hanging, since probably more of you would find automatic attraction or some automatic attempt to internally argue some of this over sex than you would alcohol. That casual sex between two people, you know, it's just, you can separate from everything else, and it has no influence on my relationship with somebody else. It has no relationship over me and the rest of society. It's nobody's business but mine. It is outmoded, outdated morality. And yet I'm telling you outright one thing, that all morality is chemical in nature. It is a reaction, either on the creative side or the less creative side, in life's continuing expansion. In other words, I'm not going to give you much more of an answer. And it's got nothing to do with morality. But anytime you find what at one time was a strictly observed or taken seriously prohibition in some religion, thou shalt not commit adultery, that millions of people still profess to believe that. And you say, well, I'm too sophisticated. That is simply outdated morality. Morality is chemical, and chemicals never go out of style. Chemicals do not disappear. Chemicals do not go away any more than aluminum cans go away. They can be recycled. Morality gets recycled, but it does not go away, and there is a chemical basis for it. And of course, I am assuming all of you know that I am not hinting about any sort of morality in bringing this up. But every time you find, even if it now appears to be outdated, even if now it does not have as many adherents as it had, the religion or certain aspects of it, and you find something that you would say, the voices in you would say, all right, from a present position, me being educated and sophisticated, and this being the 20th century, that was just imagination. That was mythology, out of control. It was their imagination. It was their reactions to darker times. There was a chemical basis for it. Now, like everything else, religions age, and they begin to become resistant to change. They began to oppose, the same way that I mentioned you in paragraph 1, of people aging, and how the individual loses this kind of normally unrecognized fear, without knowing it in any way, of being a part of a functional, biotic universe. Then religions age, and they began to resist that which they initially represented. That is the core thrust of encouragement, direct encouragement for man to grow. Any of your mechanical voices that would look back on religions or find yourself being an automatic critic of religion, which is neither here nor there, and finding parts of your religion, your forefathers' religion, or other people's religion that you find to be oppressive, that you find to be ridiculous. I threw this out at you several weeks ago. Just in closing, I pointed out that although religions of all stripes seem to be engaged in a almost non-stop dance with pessimism, yet if you listen, and even the people involved, the leaders of the church, they don't dwell upon it. If you pointed out, they would either go, oh, well, certainly, and we always keep that in mind, or else they would not even see what you're talking about. That is, that no matter that they are engaged in a continual dance of pessimism, condemnation of man, everything about him. Through it all, very seldom said at times, seems to be the belief that ultimately goodness will prevail. But it's like hearing a speech from a church, from a religion, from a period of history in humanity, an hour lecture from this church, and 59 minutes of it in 30 seconds is woe, 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 shame, 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 tut, 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 and the final 30 seconds says, yeah, but God will prevail. Good night. All right, that is the sense in which I am pointing out to you that initially, the core purpose of all religion, the reason life comes up with religion, it is force-fed through man, is it is a direct encouragement to grow. But like everything else, it will age. It becomes anathematic to the very thing that was its initial purpose. Now you should be able to see without, I've skipped along such as this many times, but take all the known religions, the major religions right now, and I could easily and properly capsulize their main activity now is being resisting change. Pick out the big one, the Catholic Church, the Pope, continually, I glance in the paper, he's continually sending out these missiles, pointing out that there are things going on that good Catholics have got to resist. And they multiply. Well, first it was alcohol, then it's drugs, promiscuity. It gets, there are more and more temptations. There are more things we must resist. Now let's go to the favorite subject of all religions, the general area of guilt, shame, and a continual repointing to man's condition of suffering. Now, besides me in the past telling everyone they had to quit suffering and that I was invalidating your card, you must be pleased for you to grow. And you cannot be pleased while being involved with a certain known, some of you can now feel it once I point it out to you, all of you eventually, if we can hold this on together long enough, will feel some, what you think of now as physical reality to this, these vague sensations of guilt, unworthiness, fear. It is a biochemical condition that is normal, to varying degrees in everyone. And you, as you would call it now, most of you, you physically cannot be in that condition and grow. So you can take what I've said over the last several years when some of you I first met, that you got to quit suffering, and I'm taking away your card, and all of you, to some degree, had voices that say, well, that's almost some kind of religious statement he's making, or he's trying to say that we've got to have absolute faith in him, and he's saying everything's okay. I didn't ask you. I didn't make you swear allegiance, so you can slip by. But you can't slip by. But it is built into everyone's wiring system that you can be engaged in attempting to do this thing, whatever the hell this is, since I keep taking more and more away from even the appearance of a name for it. While you are engaged in any activity that is less than being pleased. There is no such thing as someone attempting and succeeding to some degree, are becoming, I'll use some of the classic terms, they're becoming more enlightened while suffering. Quick history lesson, using ordinary history. Any of you remember the general tale about Buddha's beginning of torturing himself and doing what all the other gurus and great people that day did for what it was, 7 or 12 years, and then one day it struck him that fuck all this, I've starved myself to death, my teeth falling out, my hair's getting thin, and I don't understand any more than I did. Except this, I understand the people I've been following, they don't understand anything. And then, as those kind of stories go, it was like, and there he said he mobilized, which could have been 30 seconds, whether they say in the stories 30 days or whatever, then you realize. But there is no such thing as being anything less than pleased, and you be growing. The thing that in some way I am becoming more loving while suffering over the plight of humanity. And yet on the surface it appears to be true. The world is full of people who pass for our quasi-saints. And their general purpose seems to be amidst suffering, to want to point it out to other people, to cry out about the injustice. There is no growth without being pleased. There is no growth. So I have to remind especially the people who get this from afar, perhaps at some later date, I am not, I repeat, I am not an undercover minister. But I'm getting close to what we're going to have to do, and you people cooperate and moving this outside this room. There is absolutely no way, and this is what you would call unconditionally, physically correct, that there is no growth. That is, whatever terms your voice has had before you met me of being more awake, being enlightened, using some of my terms, being able to ignite the brain, the nervous system above the ordinary line, none of that is possible without being pleased. You can make that a permanent tattoo instead of those rub-ons that I've suggested that you do periodically. You can make that permanently because there's no way out. None. But what would appear to be now religion's primary, the 59-minute and 30-second messages, would seem to be encouraging, reinforcing guilt in people. Remember, religion is not up to some dastardly deed. This is the way life is moving certain areas of its body. It always has. But now it would apparently be that given an hour to each religion, that 59 minutes and 30 seconds of its message, of its purpose, would seem to be reinforcing guilt, encouraging suffering, making one feel ashamed, and then the last 30 seconds, goodness will prevail, and if you can find a way, jump on the bandwagon. That is not religion. That is not serving the core purpose. You cannot do it at any time, and you cannot do it over, as the mystical truck drivers say, over the long haul. So long as you're still feeling guilty, so long as you're still suffering, and you can't argue words with me, you can argue them with yourself. If you are anything less than pleased, you can't grow. And of course, I know this room is full of people still that a continuing feeling on your part is you're not pleased, and if I'm telling the truth, why in the world don't I give you a quick secret of being pleased? Some of this public activity is going to force some of you out. Maybe, I'm not predicting anyone individually, or it's going to force you over the edge of no longer being displeased. And it will strike you almost as magic, except as soon as it's over, it's no longer all that magical. I want to make this perhaps a little more plain. Or to try and rub your nose closer. You can tattoo this permanently, that you have got to be pleased to grow. Now, pleased, I've thought of this term as much as I think of anything in the ordinary sense. I guess 20 or 30 seconds. That's not a smart comment. But pleased, I could have said happy, zestful, gladsome, jubilant, merry. But I said it, and I'll stick with it. You have got to be pleased to grow. You cannot be pleased as long as you still are at the level that something is amiss to you. That your primary voices find my actions, and today, of course, mostly, primarily my thoughts of action, fill me with self-condemnation. It is me talking, it is me daydreaming, and I feel terrible over it. I have got to do something about it. I feel ashamed that I haven't done more with my life. I feel ashamed that I am in some way inferior. People I grew up with in school are now richer than I am. Or the good old classic one that's good all over the world, you don't need a translator, is I in general don't have any real reason to tell you, but I just feel terrible. I just feel unworthy, and I feel like the whole world is probably unworthy. You are locked absolutely into your job, and there is no way out. You can directly alter. Let me rephrase it for everyone who will hear this, perhaps someday. What we are up to will directly alter, for those properly here, that biochemical structure. And it's not a faraway promise. There are a handful of people, I'm not going to give crude hints, but I've mentioned such as this before, but sitting right here in this room, there are enough people that have personally found themselves altered without me telling them. Some of them may not have ever even thought of these words before. But there has literally been an alteration in the biochemical structure. That is the profile of the structure by which you take in food. And it's not something that these people any longer are engaged with this apparent running battle that most of you feel that, well, I've got to watch everything I think. I've got to have some kind of control. I wish he would give us more tasks. I've got to lose weight. I've got to make some more money. I mean, there are things I know that are shortcomings on my part. There are things that I have some kind of unconscious resistance toward. I've got to work these out. It happens after the fact. That in a sense, nothing has changed. The waters of the ocean in which we all swim are still there. People are still murdering one another. People are still starving. People apparently are still ignorant, selfish, all of the good religious stuff. But then, now the way it's been described in the past, the way they have attempted to describe it, not the prophets themselves, not those radical people, but those who came after them, those that got in to the direct encouragement, they attempted to describe it after the fact, or to further followers when it reached the third generation, in purely spiritual terms, that I am in some way now more aligned with God's wish for us. I am no longer, or if you follow the teachings of our great founder, which I have done, devoted my life to it, you will find that your temper is not as bad. You will find that in some way that God's graced you with tolerance. And they make numerous attempts to in some way, quote, spiritually describe what has happened to me. And I am telling you specifically, and there are people sitting here which will have an effect on you. There are people sitting in this room right now, and I repeat, it's not important, but they may have never have yet had occasion of putting words on it, that the waters go on. What appears to be the outside surroundings have not changed that much. And it is no longer some battle on my part. It is no longer me attempting to rationalize, to continually analyze what's going on out here to make some sense out of it. The food continues to flow. I still get wet. I'm still here in the same community. I'm still here on the same planet. And yet the food, the information, the sights, the sounds, the energy, the heat, everything that seems to be the native, natural currency between humans is still coming to me, and I am not processing it in the same way, literally, physically. It's not some act. It's not some continuing attempt that I'm figuring this out as I go along. That in some way, that guy in the red coat or some of his secret allies, somebody has come in and tricked me. Everything inside is now running. And here I can give you several descriptions at different speeds. The relationship between, of course, when you get to this point, there are no longer really any red and blue and yellow departments and all of that. But that everything is in some way realigned, and in a quite real sense, chemically, what is going on is no longer accepted and transformed in the way in which it was. It is a biochemical permutation. I am now religious. I'm now a mutant. My intention was, and still is, to say a few things that may appear to be of a more practical nature, but I want to insist one more time, because you're going to be faced with it shortly, in a real sense, and some of you are going to be pushed over the line. I can guarantee you that. Those of you that feel like that you haven't been encouraged enough, some of you are going to get pushed over into what you thought you've been looking for, and at the time it's going to feel like you almost didn't have much to do with it. You have got to be pleased to grow. It is only that side of life's body that is growing in the conscious sense. Take any possible ordinary description that you can come up with. Negative emotion, hostile feeling, frightening daydreams, anything that is less than being pleased, and you are working for the wrong person. It is necessary that that work go on in the body of life. But if you are working there, you are not growing in any sense whatsoever. You are not doing this. And everything that heretofore has been referred to through life's consciousness as it comes through man as being spiritual or nowadays psychological, that there is a psychological, if not a spiritual basis for guilt, for shame. All religions have some version, have some explanation of why we feel like we do, why all of us feel less than worthy. They all have a story. And it says this is the natural state. But it is either spiritual, if you were still locked into that wiring system, or it is nowadays psychological, that I feel a certain kind of like inner defacement. I feel just unworthy to be alive at times. And I can't pinpoint it. I'm not even a religious person. But something has happened. I mean, the stories I could tell you growing up, I just can't pinpoint necessarily one occasion, but it's that whole upbringing, and it's a psychological scar I have. It is a biochemical situation. And all the heroes that you've had, whoever they may have been, that your voice has imagined, that Buddha, Moses, Jesus, somebody, there was some kind of spiritual rapport. They were in some way connected with the ancient holy ones still on this planet, or they were in direct contact with the gods. I'm telling you what they were. They were a biochemical, for their time and place, permutation. And that's what this is about. It's not about a continuing battle that I'm going to figure this out, I'm going to stop my evil thoughts, I'm going to slowly work this out. It is a specific alteration that you may physically look about the same. You may not even cut off all your hair and go to a monastery, but you are a mutant. In the same way I draw out that line through the nervous system and say there is a general level of consciousness throughout this planet. And those of you who listen, I would say I should draw the line thicker and to say that within that, there's a certain degree of tolerance. That the level of consciousness at certain areas of the world right now that I could name you is not at the same level as it is here in the United States. But it's still within that line. It's within the perimeters. There is that same kind of line that is the biochemical structure of this planet. Need I point out the obvious one? That no matter what has been said by these great prophets, these recognized, renowned prophets, humanity apparently is still hating one another. That would be an unacceptable ordinary view. But also note that all the religions, in some form, whether they be worshiping tree gods or the proclaimed one soul Allah, it's always down to some basis that we have got to love one another. We have got to cease being hostile, and something in all of humanity, generally speaking, goes yes, yes, yes. But the biochemical structure, I could draw a line and say that all of humanity still operates, slight room for variation, within those limits, is yet to where ordinary people walking around can not only refrain from returning hostility to somebody that was hostile, but the information comes in quite clearly that the other person believes that they are personally being hostile toward you, that they're personally ridiculing you, they're personally making fun of you, they're personally challenging you. And to say that you understand it is an understatement. But it's not a struggle as information comes in, and you can almost pay it no attention any more than just the sensory enough to see and hear what they're doing. And it is simply that the biochemical makeup of you now is the information comes in, the fuel, the food. And it is not transformed within those perimeters that is the ordinary level right now. There is a now alteration in the whole transformation of such energy. You are in truth now, take everything you want to call it. You are now in truth a Jew and a Christian and a Buddhist and everything else. But it's not because of faith, it is not because of belief, it is not because of some continuing effort, it is not because of the gods, that is, God's being some external force to the system, in some way selecting you. And there are enough people in this room that I can put it in those kind of terms, whether it makes immediate sense to all of you, that there are people sitting here that now that I say it at least, they understand that inside, they knew it, they could say, well, I don't feel like I did years ago. And I guess all of you would say that on a good day, that you'd say, well, I don't feel exactly like I did before I got involved with this. But there are enough people sitting in this room that to say they don't feel the same way they used to is a gross understatement. Make it stronger. They can't feel like they used to. And it's not simply some kind of emotional trick. It is not some kind of psychological brainwashing. It is not through some mystical abilities that I or someone else has imparted. The structure of their biochemical system is now such that they're a mutant. In a way in which energy would normally, of all kinds, would be transformed in them is no longer possible. It simply doesn't happen. And you can feel it. It's simply real. That inside, I am no longer the same person. In fact, I'm being funny again, but I'm trying to point you at around a quick corner, that it's like, in fact, I couldn't go back if I wanted to. It's too late. The little humor being, of course, that who would want to, but well, I was back to my intention to go a little more personally. My periodic but continuing encouragement that everyone should pursue a hobby if you had it. You need to have, everybody, if it's all possible, if it is wired up in you and anywhere, you need to be pursuing a pleasurable life hobby. You might also neuralize this. Why is the world filled with, what purpose is being served, of course, by life? It is filled with people, not only at present times, but throughout history, proclaiming that they're not doing what they want to do. All the way from women, heretofore being tied to the fire in the cave or the microwave oven, to men, apparently having more freedom in a horizontal sense up until today. But men throughout history have been saying, boy, what a pain in the ass it is to be governor of this district. What a pain it is to be general and have to general all day. What I really wanted to be was a hairdresser or a poet. And of course, right up until today. And you people sitting here, if you remember, we had this little task. I asked you to pursue it some while back. You know, what would you do if you were absolutely freed of all responsibility? To wit, apparently, the freedom would come about when I said, imagine you had $1 million tax-free coming in per day, cash money. The point being that everyone has, to some degree, feels like, well, what I'm doing is not what I'd like to do, but I've got to pay the rent. I'll pursue my guitar strumming, I'll pursue my writing, I'll pursue my dancing on the side, but I've got to pay the rent. Now, you people know by now, what I'm about to say is not some sophomoric, cynical observation. But you had better try to get more aligned with this kind of biochemical reality that, you know, you can pay the rent, and you'll be paying the rent up until the day you die, and you're going to die in the not too distant future. And it may be able to be said about you, well, he seemed pretty miserable most of the time I talked to him, but that son of a gun paid his rent faithfully. He said he hated his job. He just said he despised his job, and he did. I believe it. He just always looked just real down the mouth. But boy, was he really efficient about having his rent paid on time. You should be, at all cost, since some of you keep asking me, time is not getting any longer horizontally. You can affect it vertically in yourself. But you're all going to die. And the feeling that I just am miserable doing what I'm doing, but I would be happy. I am just absolutely convinced. I would be pleased in the widest sense that I can imagine, from my experience out in the ordinary world, to be doing such and such. You should be close enough for me to give you just a small hint if I don't have to get down and force everybody. As you should be able to pursue what would seem to be just an everyday horizontal sense, pleasing to you without any guilt. The feeling that I have got to, in some way, keep up my good credit rating. I have got to pay the rent. I have got to keep a reasonable job. What will my mother think? What will life think? I don't have anybody in particular in mind, but they're the things that are already wired into everyone that you never question. The same way that it's just natural to suffer over being here. No one ever questions that. Who can explain it? It's the will of the gods. It's the sign of the times. Nobody questions the fact that I found myself, I don't know how I became a roofer. I don't know how I became a CPA. But I'm here, and it pays the rent, and it only takes up 8 hours a day, but God, I hate it. If I could sit around and play guitar 8 hours a day, whew. But even if I tried it, of course, the yellow circuit cannot operate on this kind of information, having never done it, so it doesn't talk about it this way, but here's what it amounts to. It's down in the nonverbal sections. If I did that, it wouldn't be as much fun as I think, because I'd be sitting around constantly worrying about what I'm doing, feeling ashamed of it, knowing that this can't be done. You can't sit around and play your damn guitar all day and not work, not after you spent 4 years learning how to be a CPA. Not after I build up seniority here in this business. I can't go do that. I would not enjoy it in the same way. You got to be pleased to grow. And that does not exclude the ordinary world. How about a little joke? Some guys are sitting around a recording studio, and somebody had just seen one of these atomic warfare movies where the whole planet is, most of it's blown up. And one of them poses the question, hey, what would you do if it was suddenly announced? It's all over, it's too late to call them back. The Russians sent the atomic warheads on the way. No matter what we do, they're going to hit, and one of them's aimed right here at our city, and their estimated time of arrival is 10 minutes from now. And that's it. I mean, it's done for. What would you do? And one guy sitting over there in the corner by his drums, he said, I'd go practice. That is a hobby. That should be our kind of people. Let me give a little kind of circular, hinted wrap-up back to religion. If there was a truly new, creative religion, which if it was new, it would be creative, it would now have to absolutely reveal its own biochemical basis. Now consider, from a very common viewpoint, the possible ends of a spectrum, as opposed to the ancient religions, the established religions. How about the so-called humanist view? That in general would seem to be proclaiming that man is freed from even the illusion of the old gods, and that he can reach his own perfection or his further perfection, his own fulfillment, alone. I guess that's a fair summary of the so-called humanist viewpoint. All right, a new religion would not be aligned either with that or with that which they are apparently condemning, that is, the ancient religions. For it would now have to, in a very specific, that is, a biochemical structure, reveal in a new fashion that man can in no wise be apart from the waters in which we all swim. And that to take what would seem to be, if I did not make it clear enough, which obviously I have managed to cloud it, as being what apparently is the old, ancient, established, confining, dead, outdated religions, and looking at an extreme move from that as being what I was labeling the humanist viewpoint, that man does not need all that crap. That he, quite by himself, and of course the collective effort of all of us right-thinking people, can further refine man, ourselves, can further fulfill ourselves in what amounts to, compared to older religion, can do this alone. And they're not saying, although they don't recognize it, they're not saying just being freed from old gods. They're saying we can do it in some way, being partially, at times, freed from out there. That is no new religion. That is no new creative philosophy. What a truly new and creative religion would have to be, would be that which would now direct man's attention, assuming that the time is right, that there are there now people outside this room that can hear some form of it. It does not necessarily have to be in the verbal form that I am using with you currently, or any I've used in the past, but it would have to reveal, compared to religion, compared to attempted humanistic philosophies, it would have to reveal that the basis of this, the basis of all religion, the basis of all experience, is biochemical. Starts with a B, ends with an L, has a period after it. That's it. That all morality, all prohibitions of a spiritual nature are chemical in nature, and they age. They don't go. That all morality, all prohibitions of a spiritual nature are chemical in nature, and they age. They don't go away. They get recycled, but it is a chemical process. There is no such thing as a conversion, even at the ordinary level, without there having been a biochemical alteration in the person. Add another part. In all respects, you have got to be entertained to be pleased. Whether apparently you're being entertained from without, or whether you apparently are entertaining yourself by sitting in your room, learning new chords on the guitar. But you must be entertained. If people are not pleased, let us say, with their vocation, is it not obvious to you that being a CPA does not entertain this person? Being a roofer, the man says, you call this entertainment? Now you come up here and stay 8 hours a day. In any way, could you call what you're doing to be entertaining? No. Well, the person is not pleased. Now consider what would apparently be the more dramatic sides of religion, besides just the conversions. How about the healings? All religions have threads of this running through them, of some kind of miraculous something, and what seems to be, of course, the most miraculous, the most interesting and entertaining to people is, you mean somebody had the same malady I had, and that they've joined this religion and they were cured? Where do I sign up? Or let me hear more about it. You cannot be, first let me point out again, that many of you, the world out there is full of people that find the idea of faith healing, whether it be back in the so-called religious tales of Orr, or whether it be the renowned Ernest Angley and his tent services in contemporary times of lining people up like an assembly line and saying, you be healed, and people saying, I can hear, I can see, I can walk. And people say, well, it's a sham. It's imagination. There was psychosomatic illness. No matter what they say. Let's leave it at this. What they're calling healing takes place. course, most of you here have got a little direct knowledge of some of that. In a different form, of course. But let me just simply tell you that what they call healing takes place. It's taking place right now. Some guy with a 5th grade education, maybe he and his wife with, God forbid, an accordion in somebody's hospital room singing some hymn, the man praying and calling down the power of the gods and saying there are demons at work here, and this, our sister here, has always been a good Christian or Jew or Buddhist, and I call upon the Lord as his servant, has healed this woman, and he touches her or does something, and the person apparently has changed, or the structure in them has changed, and what seemed to be illness has now gone away. What ordinary people say, the person was healed. Let's leave it at that, comma. You can't be healed unless you're entertained. If you observed one of these processes of these so-called faith healers, let's use contemporary time since it's so going on, that ask everyone after service, everyone who's sick, line up here and I'll pray for you as a servant of the gods. And hugs them or puts his hand on their forehead and says, what's your problem? They say, I can't hear, I've got such thing. He says, be healed. And apparently, if you were there in person, where they don't have the modern benefit of being able to edit the tape, but if you were there in person, you would see that some people seem to get healed and others don't. And some people say, I can't hear, and he says, be healed. And then he says, can you hear me? The person says, yes. And other people say, I can't hear. The person right behind him, and he says, be healed. How do you feel? And the person says, what? Apparently some people got healed and some didn't. Now, as fast as I can talk, you can imagine the kind of explanations they would have. Most of them do a preface, like everything else in life. You do a preface to your act by explaining, I'm here to pray for you and to help you, but tell you the truth, I've had a bad cold and I'm not sure the Lord wants to get close enough. He don't want to catch it. Or it's not me doing the healing, it's God, and it takes your faith, and so some of you may not get healed tonight, but hey, don't blame me. It's like everything else in life. It's a preface to your act. I'm here to sing and play for you good folks tonight, but boy, does my throat sore. But I won't disappoint you. I'll do the best I can, and I hope you bear with me. That's the way it goes. That's part of life. But beyond those kind of explanations, well, I was going to tell you that you have a string of people who come by, and apparently the same kind of prayer gets said, same kind of illness, and some get healed, and some don't. Those who don't get healed were not entertained. That's it. If you are not entertained, you can't get healed. If you're not entertained, you can't be converted. If you're not entertained, you can't be pleased, and if you're not pleased, you can't grow. And of course, we're talking about a certain kind of growth. Let me touch on a couple of things that I have started over the last several weeks that I have mentioned. A part leading up to this kind of biochemical permutation is what appears to be the kind of efforts that one might make along the way and to kind of try to trick you into. This would be a part of natural behavior, be more a part of natural behavior if you were now a biochemical mutant, is acting in all forms. Not on the basis of memory, but on the basis of understanding what life's goal is. And yet that, if carried much further verbally, would be another form of my verbal insanity, of how could you act not on the basis of memory? Then I ask you, how could you ever be a Jew, a Christian? How could you ever be religious so long as you are dependent upon acting on the basis of memory. How could you ever qualify it as being something new if you were still acting on the basis of memory? And I have given you enough tasks, enough tricks, that you've got some notion now on a good day as to what this storehouse of memory, not just here, but in all the floors, the muscles and the mind, and into your own breathing mechanism, of what those memories amount to. Now, in an ordinary person, they amount to everything. What are you without your memories? How do you know not only who you are, to ask that oftentimes chuckling, producing question of mine? You get up in the morning and look. But not only that, but how do you know what's right? How do you know what's wrong? What kind of behavior do you know to criticize in life? What kind of people do you know to be your natural adversaries? Non-believers? Weeds in our little garden of life over here in our corner? Without memory, how could you function? You'll find out. Many of you will before this is over. It sounds absolutely insane. And of course, I don't guarantee any of these words, because once you see it, you understand, aha, he'd always told the truth that it can't be described. But that's when I keep suggesting humorously that someday you'll throw me a big party and give me a prize that it can't be described. I see it myself, but goddamn, you did a good job. I'll tell you this, you can't beat it. There's nobody on the planet right now that can beat it, but it's still not true. It's still not literally true. But on the basis of this kind of literal biochemical alteration in what you are, the processing of all information through all the senses, and then what seems to be you now, this kind of I that has its own life. On your worst days, you're still back in the throes of that. My imagination, all my negative daydreams, my great fears. You know, the real me in here instead of the kind of stuff out here that gives me passing problems. Although it's not literally true in words any more than anything else, it is as though you're no longer operating on the basis of memory. But besides the superficial irrationality of this, I ask you again, it didn't get many people, but how, if you were still believing in ordinary religion, how could you claim to go back to your forefathers' religion or to adopt a new one and say, all right, I am now a Jew, I am now a Christian, I am now a true believer, that is a true Muslim, if you were still operating, if your actions were still based solely on your memory? Because you would still be everything that you were before. And everything that you were before was not that which was native to a Jew or Christian or Buddhist, any religious person. Well, yeah, I still hate all people who are Irish, or I still hate all people that's not of my religion or my race. I mean, that's just me. I can't help it. That is my memory. How can you say that you're anything? How could you believe that there was some prophet somewhere that the God suddenly smote him in his consciousness and he got up and he understood all these miraculous things if he was still operating on the basis of memory? It's almost as though he now operates and that each thing is something new, it's different, although he knows otherwise. But it is not his memory. It is not him biochemically taking in information, and it goes through what seems to be memory, and then you transform the energy and you send it back out. Someone of another religion comes by you and says, hey, fuck you. You say, hey, fuck you too. That's memory in operation. But what if you had no memory? What if you were not operating on the basis of memory, but you were operating now on the basis of understanding life's goals? And it's somebody going by and saying, aren't you a Catholic? Yes, I am. Get fucked. That's not the final statement. That is not an exemplary statement of what life is up to. But I understand life's goals. I understand the way growth takes place. That's part of it. But you had no memory of that, because that is unnatural. That is being a mutant. And so you got no memory of someone saying, well, if you're a Catholic, get fucked. I got no memory of that. I am not operating on the basis of memory. I am operating now on the basis that I understand that. I am pleased with what life is up to because I understand what life's up to. It is healthy, it is robust, it is complex, it stumbles, it is disspecific, if there is such a word, there is now. And yet I understand it. Not through some intellectual effort, not through some act of faith down in the Blue Department, not through some act of self-effacement or self-torture down in the mines, not of torturing myself without going without certain foods or whatnot, that I tortured myself into this state. It's on the basis that now the ordinary energy that is necessary, the complex range of energy that is making life grow through all of human behavior, remembering that it takes all kinds or there wouldn't be all kinds, that now that information, all the way from what I used to think was good information, bad information, what I used to think was encouragement from others, what I used to take as being attacks from others, I understand it is the full necessary menu of energy to make life grow, and I can no longer, I just don't. It doesn't happen. I do not transform energy on the basis of memory. My biochemical structure is not what it was, and I now am not a critic of life. I now have no memory of having an opinion about this. I now understand what life is up to. But it was not some yellow circuit trick. I did not learn it. That inside is different. Not spiritual. My damn guts are different. I got vague memory, if you really want to play. I'm speaking for other people now, you understand. I'm not talking about me. But there are people here who now have this experience on a continuing basis, that there has been an inalterable biochemical change in them. And they don't really look that much different than when I met them. I'm saying that from your viewpoint. But the information that comes in, I could say, speaking for them again, I got a vague memory of how this used to upset me. I thought it did. That I would really speak out about this kind of situation. I could not help myself. In fact, I thought it was proper that I would immediately, vocally, if nothing else, react to this in a negative way. And now, in a sense, I couldn't unless I was putting forth a totally willful act for some reason, which I got no reason whatsoever to do it. In other words, there is nothing natural anymore that I could react to that. And it's not something in line with the old religions. It is not because God has touched my little spirit or my little soul. It's my guts are different. And you can feel it. It's always been called mystical experience. I'm going to give out a little task, since I no longer have the interest in trying to keep track of what gets on these tapes out to you people now at some future date, except I will point this out. I can't enforce it from afar, and assuming that some people may hear this even after I bought the farm, I certainly can't enforce it then. But anything I give out as a task, if it doesn't make sense, if you don't feel like catching it from afar, that is, not being with me personally when I give it out, that it seems uncertain, you don't seem absolutely clear as what I meant, you should be cautious in an extraordinary sense in doing it. And if you've got any uncertainty on not being with me personally when I give them out, is you can also learn something from the thinking about the action as opposed to the action if you're not certain what you should have done. That is, to try and neuralize all kinds of possibilities, all kinds of potentials, followed by commas, that you can discover just based upon what you thought I said. what you thought I intended. All right, this one is a continuing task until at such time as I ever stop it. And this is a literal task, is every day I want everyone to sing. Don't you let a day go by without singing. I'm going to read some papers. I'll point out one other little thing since we're getting close, irreversibly close to the next stage of this. I started to say the final stage, but that almost gave me the blues. The next stage. The necessity that one be pleased to grow, the absolute necessity. You might imagine, you might believe you hear voices that would say, not without some predictable validity, that if there were some sort of new religion that life now needed, and in some form, whatever I'm going to do publicly with you people, that there has to be a certain kind of missionary zeal to it. I mean, I could even use that as a kind of defining additional adjective to being pleased. If you're pleased, I mean through a biochemical change, that you're actually pleased. And you, then, as I pointed out, that these apparent prophets, holy men, and religion founders of the past had undergone it, and simultaneously, whatever that means, they understood the purpose of it, and that how it benefited life, how it benefited in a very specific way, what life was up to, and having done it to that person, to that Moses, to that Buddha, to that Jesus, that I understand what life is up to, that life in a sense is talking to itself, and it's letting one person in one area hear it talk to itself. And that's what was his awakening. That was what was his enlightenment. He also understands that this is very limited. He also understands, although apparently they later preach otherwise, that we should love one another. He understands that we've got to, in part, hate one another for life to stay alive. That is the growth process, but they also understand I can't go out and say, look, we got to love one another, that is some of us. And then the rest of you, you go hate one another, and it'll all work out, trust me. That is not the way it operates. But he understands the specific benefit in a very limited area that his awakening, his biochemical permutation announces, signifies. And then he finds a form, after he's attracted a few people, and I've got a few people here, that there are some here that will undergo that. Some's already undergone it to the degree, as I said in my little humorous comment, they couldn't get out of it now if they wanted to. They simply could not transform within the parameters of that level that I was mentioning earlier, that biochemical corridor in which everyone is operating now. They could not go back and operate within that limits if they wanted to, if that were true. But a small group of people that apparently were not directly affected by this, and they can get it, in a sense, second-handed. But it happens. But outside that group, this Jesus, this Moses, understood if it goes outside this room, outside this group of people, it can't go out in this form because it simply won't have any effect. It's not some intellectual decision he made. It's not him going out and having a polling, hiring a PR firm or a bunch of pollsters to go out and say, hey, go out and ask a group of people, catch a representative number of people, and see if they would buy this as a new religion. The biochemical change in him is such that he understands the limits of how this can go on the basis that it happened to me and that I can describe it to a few people. I understand outside this room, outside this group of people, it can't go on this basis. That's it. There's nothing else to be said. Once it leaves that room, it must be entertaining. And it must be apparently carried along with a kind of missionary zeal. Now, might I point out, other than my periodic appearances that most of you have seen by now, and that I assume you understand what I mean when I say it's an act, it's simply an act. It is not me being carried along in the ordinary sense by some kind of missionary zeal. But now let me point out, you might find this as a potentially interesting side light, or some of you might find it as being a middle light. Notice that the world is full, throughout history, including today, of people under all kinds of banners, apparently driven with a great missionary zeal, a kind of heat, a kind of passion, whether they be apparent Christian ministers, whether they be some New Age cult, the Moonies, Hare Krishnas, but the people involved. And of course your dream is of the leader, and operating within that ordinary corridor of biochemical transformation of this ordinary energy, even though it be historical energy, is that, yes, I can imagine the fire in Moses' eyes. I can imagine the passion with which a Jesus went out and swayed the crowds. So it's not surprising. I mean, I'd agree with, Cult X over here. But you absolutely expect a missionary zeal. But what I was going to point out to you is if indeed the kind of examples I were using of the Moses and Buddhas and Jesus were in fact what they appeared to be historically, they were not what much of your ordinary voices would have them to have been. That is, filled with missionary zeal, because they understood the limits of it. They didn't have to go and try it. It wasn't some experiment. They understood there is no missionary zeal. Once this biochemical change had taken place in them, they also understood they could almost smell them, but they could also almost number them if they had thought about it before the fact, that there's going to be a small number of people that's already wired up to hear this. I can't convert them. I can't talk them into it. In fact, if I run across some that apparently can be converted to something, I understand to, get rid of them. They got to already be prepared to be ignited. And then all I've got to do is just find the right kind of mouse. Well, I won't go into that. It just has its limits. It's already set up. But for it to go somewhere else, there has to be a kind of missionary zeal. And then at the ordinary level, what I was starting to point out to you, the world has always been and still is filled with, apparently, zealous, evangelically driven men of some kind of spiritual cause. And so how can that be if what I've described, that these other, assuming they were real founders of something, I'm saying you were not that way, and obviously I'm not that way. And so the very thing I'm saying, it seems like the ordinary world is full of these kind of zealous missionaries. Have you forgotten already me trying to get you to look at that part of life that is continual, of life talking to itself, trying to see what will work? If it's got a bunch of people going out and holler, well, this is a new age upon us, and what we've got to do is return to the earth. We've got to get out of this close proximity in cities. We've got to go back to a communal living and share the wealth and have free love. And they're passionate about it. They have followers out on street corners. They're raising money. They'll talk you to death. And from one view, what of course I'm telling you, there is nothing out of the ordinary. They might as well be participants or spectators at a football game, a rugby match, it doesn't matter. It's the same thing going on. And yet they seem to be so zealous, so filled with some kind of spirit to convert others, and yet it's life continually trying out things. And the more zealous they are, the more apparently mechanically passionate they are, the more it is life wondering, is this true? Will this work? Can I get anywhere with this? I was going to give you a semicolon conclusion by pointing out that that is going to be part of the responsibility of you people. It's to furnish that kind of merry passion. And it does not have to be faked. I've got enough of you that if I turned you loose, I'd probably have to say, calm it down a little bit in the beginning. It just, and those drafted into my job, what I was going to point out, it is not what you might have normally expected. That it is not necessarily my job to be the zealot, to be all that enthused by ordinary appearances. But remember, a synonym, since I said you must be pleased to grow, a synonym for pleased is comfortable. Somebody has to be the jubilant missionary. Somebody must furnish that kind of passion. And that's part of your job. And once you get pushed to the wall, we'll have some more besides the handful I've already got. Some of you are suddenly going to become that. And then a little while after the fact, I will point out to you that your guts are different. And you'll go, oh my God, you're right. That your muscles are not operating in the same way. The kind of chemicals that transmit messages between the muscles that keep them in certain positions are no longer the same. You don't breathe the same. And the mind doesn't seem to operate the same. And everybody that's down the respiratory system that seems to be in charge of feelings, that my guts are no longer the same. Is there some way I could trick somebody else or to tell somebody about this? And that's when, once I get it arranged properly, it's when I have to go ahead and say, all right, sick them. The old religions say that the founders and prophets used to say things like, go forth and spread the good news. I don't find that to be incongruous with my sick 'em. We got tape left?
30 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to read some of our papers. This is labeled, it's in regard to a task from several weeks ago, it's labeled misused circuitry functions. If I may, yes you may, bring this back up momentarily. I was reading over the papers, and let me point out several people handed in papers that were labeled something along the lines of misused circuitry, etc. You remember what I asked you was to try and neuralize, find your own ordinary human activities in which more than one of the senses were involved. That, from a certain viewpoint, could you look at it and extract one of the mechanically participatory senses in this, to extract it from one viewpoint, to say the very least, the operations, the experience, apparently not be harmed or hindered, and perhaps even be enhanced. But it was not simply, I'm not picking on this person's heading, but it was not me pointing out, well, wait a minute, there are certain areas where things are not running efficiently, that you should not be daydreaming while having sex. It is natural. Everybody on this planet, by now, if they can talk at some time, and more than just periodically, they daydream while having sex, because the mind's going to be doing something. That infra system is going to be in operation. But it is not from any ordinary viewpoint of saying, well, it's incorrect, in some way humanity's gone astray. It is not. But I ask you to try and neuralize situations wherein it seems to be natural. Forget your mechanical disapproval of it, or hearing somebody else say it's not proper. But to find situations wherein there were more than one sense obviously involved, there seemed to be almost equal partners in participation, and that you could neuralize extracting one of them, diverting its attention, or if you could, cut it out of this situation, and to say the very least it would not interfere with it operating, and perhaps from even a different, more keen, oblique view, I could see where it might, at least in my instance, or in an individual instance, might enhance it. But, having made that perfectly clear, still this was in regard to the test, and I wanted to read some of it. But they did go ahead and entitle it Misuse Circuitry Functions, which I understand, and now you do too, right? Making a yellow circuit decision based upon blue circuit position, quote, I guess I was sad at the time. Making a yellow circuit decision based upon red circuit position, quote, maybe I just didn't feel up to par that day. Then, they note, at this point it became obvious to me that each circuit could be shown to have its limitations, and that there are areas better left up to the other circuits, which is what I believe you said in the first place. There are some more combinations, though, that I thought I would mention. To wit, the blue circuit taking on the red circuit's fatigue. Quote, I guess I shouldn't have gotten mad. I guess I was just tired. The blue circuit taking on yellow circuit's memory. Quote, every time I think about it, I get mad. The red circuit being driven to illness by the blue circuit. I guess I shouldn't have been so worried lately. I bet that's why I got a cold. I don't know how you explain it if you hadn't been worried lately, though. Does a person who is awake, I don't personally care if it's a continuation of such terms that you people have picked up in other places, even though I have thrown it about in some of my public writings, I'll let it go. We all assume we know what this person was talking about. If a person is more awake, then before he dies, does he know what death is all about? Or is it as much an unknown for him as everybody else? I said I was going to read some of these. I didn't say I was going to answer them. When people appear to be ordinary, and they say that they know, quote, I am going to heaven, or I'm going to be reincarnated, or whatever, is this just their imagination, or what? I didn't read this in some way to make fun of it now, as you know. I'll remind you, if I don't say anything else, one more time, that there's some things that nobody can ever tell you, including me. Up to date, the most proper hint, the most proper even sketch that I've ever given was to point out to you the difference even in the human operation between long and short-term memory, and how that might be connected to what seems to be death within the body of life, that is, of you dying, and there is no trace of you after a brief second, whatever that might be to life. And for me to say, what is there about you to be remembered? You can't let ordinary voices, of course, take that as being, well, that's right. If I had lived up to my potential, I'm sure life would have felt, if his description is fair, that life would be inclined to remember me. But hell, here I am, a damn roofer, playing a gig out in bars at night on the weekend. Nobody pays any attention. If that description is, if he's giving some sort of proper hint, life will forget me like yesterday's news. Well, I can tell you this. I'll give you one little further hint. Life has undergone its own biochemical changes along the way, man being one of them. Life understands, even on a greater level, that it must be pleased to continue growing. And if you think life sits around worrying about yesterday's bad news, whether it be you or something else, and you have yet to even have a suspicion of what I've been talking about. So if you want to be certain that you'll be forgotten, you do understand from a certain kind of view, I'm not just playing with words, what other people call being dead is what? Is being forgotten. Put the funny ones to last. The expression, quote, well, that's neither here nor there, could that probably be an unknowing observation or an unknowing... As a matter of fact, I've asked this person before to write a little plainer. You know who you are, and I'm asking you again. I had it back in the back room. Well, that's neither here nor there, quote, could that be an unknowing statement as to the reality of third force? I had to fill it in, that was the gist of it. All right, the funny ones. Always leave them laughing. What if brain activity had an odor? Then all kinds of products would come out from the middle factory level to make ideas smell better. Brains would have to be equipped with fans to provide ventilation. The St. Quantum's Day Massacre. This is like a news flash. Flash. Fashion heinously murdered at bizarre spree. Among the slain, good taste and propriety. An eminent professor theorizes that a strange influx of time zones into the ordinary present may have been the cause. A strange discontinuity of normal behavior was in evidence. In the end, the assailants, however, could not be identified. You people alive and reasonably well in other cities, I remind you again, it becomes more important, whether you realize it yet or not, to remember each other, to remember that there are other people that are out there, and to remember that you should be pleased that they are out there. And now, with my mystical ability of this finger, I'm about to conclude.